Now I'm going to start doing the figures in this panel. Now that I've got the foreground done, and I'm just using again a rotating repeatograph. It's actually the 0.18 size. The figures are actually quite small, so I'm not going to put a terrible lot of detail into these figures, but again, I'm just tightening up the anatomy as I go along as well. Even though I've sort of tightened it up a bit more from the layout stage with the pencils, I've still sort of got a little bit more drawing to do here with the ink. Now I've started with Cyclops here because obviously he's on the he's in the foreground and he's on the left, and I'm right-handed, so obviously I don't want to be running my hand all over fresh ink that I've just laid on the page. So I'm going to start with Cyclops here. You can see I am, even though I'm using the repeatograph, I am actually adding a little bit of line weight to the figure here. Just doubling back over with it. I mean, I could be using the crocal here, but I just prefer with these smaller panels, smaller figures, to use the repeatograph and have a bit more control over it. Okay, now just moving on to doing Colossus now. Adding more detail and tightening up my structure with the ink. As you can see, I'm just adding lines which sort of aren't there as well. They haven't been penciled in yet. But I sort of already have all this stuff in my head. I sort of know what lines I'm going to put there. And the good thing about drawing characters like Colossus, or anyone really with sort of shiny skin, is you can sort of draw all the muscle lines in and then just add some rough shadows and reflection lines, and it sort of looks cool. Whereas if you add all the muscle lines with the figures who sort of have regular skin, it just looks like they're trying to flex every muscle, so you have to be a bit more selective in the lines that you use. Whereas, you know, characters like Iceman and Colossus and all those shiny skin characters, you can do all these cool effects on their skin and sort of keep all your structure lines in of the muscles. Colossus also has these cool sort of banding lines which go around his armoured skin, and they might at first seem like a pain to draw because he's got all these lines all over his body, but they're actually quite helpful in defining his form. You also find, those sorts of lines on characters like Spider-Man, and it may seem like a pain to draw the webbing, but actually helps you to define the form on the figure, so they're quite useful. Now just gonna sneak Nightcrawler in there in the background. And Nightcrawler has this constant core shadow on his face. So I'm just putting that in there with the repeater graph. And his costume's quite his old costume's quite simple to draw as well. So I like drawing it. It's very quick to draw. Okay, just gonna move on to Sunfire now. I don't think I've actually drawn before, so you'll see me referencing, looking back and forth, sort of trying to reference his costume. Again, just adding bits to his anatomy to tighten up the structure of the figure. Putting in his mask and his face. He's actually got quite a bit going on his costume. He's sort of got the rising sun belt buckle with all the lines emanating across his chest, and he's sort of got these flame sort of lines around his where his gloves and his legs are. I'm actually looking now for some reference for his legs, because the image I was using before doesn't actually have a shot of his legs, so I'm trying to find another panel that's got him in it with his legs. There's actually a bit of a tangent going on there with Sunfire and Colossus's hand, so I'm just going to try and go heavier on the line weights. Just got the 0.25 repeater graph, and just want to try and separate those two planes. Don't know if I was entirely successful with doing that, but I've just gone a little bit heavier there just to sort of separate Sunfire and Colossus a bit. Right now I'm actually going to put in Banshee down here. I would have had Banshee a bit higher up in the panel, but there's obviously going to be word balloons and captions up the top, so I'm going to keep him flying low. Again, just with the 0.18 repeater graph, not too much detail in there. Just gone a bit thicker with the 0.35 for he's got these thick black lines on the wings of his costume, so just to save time colouring it in, it's I'm just going to use a thicker repeater graph to do that. I'm actually using a 0.5 here, and it's actually not flying very good, so I'm going to use the 0.35 to spot the blacks on Colossus. On Cyclops, sorry. And Colossus I will do later. And again, just the black helps to pop them forward a bit more as well. Separate them from the other characters sort of in the background. Back with the 0.18, going to move on to drawing Storm. I'm actually quite familiar with Storm's costume, but I've just flicked the book back to the cover. She's in a similar pose to the one I have her in here, so just to make sure I've got all the costume and stuff right, double check. It's always good to double check even if you are familiar with the character. Again, just filling in the blacks with the 0.35. Now, I would normally do her hair with a brush, but because it's so small, and the figure's so small in this panel, I'm just going to use the repeater graph to do it. Putting in the wings of a costume. Just rotating the paper around and trying to get the curve right. Now, because I've got a large area here, I could use a brush, but I've just decided to go in with the 0.7 repeater graph to sort of lay in the blacks on her wings. And the blacks on her boots. Next up is Wolverine. Again, small figures and not a lot of detail. And the camera's gone off. The drawing's gone off camera here. So I apologise for that. But I'm sure whatever I'm drawing looks really good. So again, just tightening up the anatomy and stuff on Wolverine, and basically it's pretty straightforward. Same thing I've been doing with the other characters there. Again, spotting the blacks with the 0.35 just on his costume and his mask. Putting in his claws again with the 0.18 and finishing up the tree line in the background, a bit more foliage.